Welcome to Betrayal Narrative X.
Do you really think you can replace me with some farm girl? Nicole's voice rang with anger, but there was uncertainty in her eyes. Larry leaned back in his chair, folded his arms across his chest, and exhaled slowly. He looked at the woman he'd once loved, but now he saw only an empty shell in front of him. His travel bag was next to him, the only thing he decided to take with him into his new life. You replaced me a long time ago, Nicole. His voice was flat, almost emotionless. I just made sure I left first. At that moment, the door slammed loudly, leaving her in an empty house that no longer belonged to her. All she had left were the memories of the life she had so easily ruined. But how did it all begin? How did he, a successful and calculating man, end up in this situation? To understand it, you have to go back to the day he first saw Nicole Reynolds. Loud laughter and clinking glasses filled the luxurious banquet room of the Regal Heights Hotel. Larry Reynolds, one of the leading brokers at Wilcox and Partners, stood at the bar, watching the scene intently. Tonight was awards night for top employees, and although he himself had long been accustomed to such events, one event made him tense. On the stage stood John Caldwell, his main competitor, an ambitious but short-sighted broker who loved loud statements and cheap punts. Today John was trying to impress the audience, but something went wrong. His presentation turned out to be crude. He was rambling, confused about numbers, and when one of his colleagues asked him a clarifying question, he got lost. There was whispering in the room, and then someone chuckled loud enough for everyone to hear. Larry wasn't so much watching John as the woman sitting at his table. She looked annoyed, as if she'd just realized she'd bet on the wrong horse. Nicole Reynolds, tall, well-groomed, with perfect styling and a slightly mocking gaze. She leaned over to her neighbor and whispered something, and then she burst out laughing, covering her mouth with her hand. "Mr. Caldwell seems to be in big trouble," came a voice nearby. Larry turned his head and saw his friend and co-worker, Mike Carter. "I'm not surprised," he said, keeping his eyes on Nicole. His girlfriend, on the other hand, seemed to be going through some changes in her life. Standards too high. Mike grinned, raising his glass. "More like too cold a calculation," Larry said. He knew that look. It was not the look of a woman disappointed in a man. It was the look of a man who had already made up his mind and was mentally somewhere far away. 2 weeks passed before fate brought them together again. That evening, Larry walked into one of the city's elite restaurants to discuss a new project with his partners, but suddenly he saw her. Nicole sat at the bar alone, without John Caldwell. She was flipping through the menu, but her eyes didn't linger on the dishes, but glided around the room as if searching for something. "Dining alone is not the most pleasant thing to do," Larry said, sitting down next to me. She looked up at him and smiled slightly, as if he was the one she had been waiting for. "Unless it's in good company," she replied, looking him over. That night was the beginning of their story. Larry had always thought of himself as someone who was in control, but that night was the first time he felt like he was letting his guard down. Nicole knew how to say the right words, make the right gestures, and her look told him, "You're special. You're better than anyone else." And 2 years later, he'll realize he was just another stepping stone in her plans. Nicole Reynolds was the perfect wife, at least for the first year and a half of their marriage. She knew how to behave in public, supported him in front of his colleagues, knew when to be gentle and caring and when to display cold aristocratism. But 18 months later, something had changed. Larry didn't notice it right away. At first, it was small things. She touched him less often. Her phone was on silent more often, and her work trips were suspiciously frequent. But his suspicions were finally confirmed when she announced that she was pregnant. The timing didn't add up. They'd barely been close in recent months, and when he tried to remember specific dates, it didn't fit in his head. How come she was already 3 months along? But the final proof came unexpectedly and brutally. First he felt a slight discomfort, then pain. After a visit to the doctor, he found out that he had contracted a sexually transmitted disease. He stared at the test results, feeling everything shatter inside him. Nicole, the woman he'd chosen, The woman he trusted. Your partner should also be examined, the doctor said sternly. Larry only smiled. Oh, don't worry, doctor. His voice was as cold as ice. She'll get all the results, and not just the medical ones. He walked out of the clinic, knowing that his life had just changed. But if Nicole thought he'd make a scene, make a scandal, or retaliate stupidly and obviously, she was sorely mistaken. Larry Reynolds was a broker, and in his world, there were no sudden moves. In his world, everything was planned to the last detail. He had a carefully planned revenge ahead of him, but first and foremost, he was going to disappear. Nicole Reynolds always knew she had an innate ability to get out of difficult situations. She could charm, persuade, turn circumstances in her favor. But the moment she opened the doctor's letter, her world cracked. She was sitting at the kitchen table, about to drink her morning coffee, when she noticed the envelope with the medical logo on it. Larry had left it right on the table, folded neatly next to her plate. It looked as if he just thoughtfully left her some correspondence. But there was something odd about the gesture. She tore open the envelope and ran her eyes over the text. Test results, chlamydia. Urgent examination of the partner is required. Words jumped before his eyes as reality slowly broke through the thick armor of complacency. She blinked a few times, as if expecting the letters on the paper to disappear or change. But no. Black and white, venereal disease. Justy. He's infected. Her first reaction was disgust, then anxiety. Not again. Nicole stood up abruptly, feeling her heart beat faster. Questions swirled in his head. When did he find out? Why didn't he say anything? And most importantly, what was he going to do next? She quickly grabbed her phone, opened the messages, and saw that the last message from Larry had been sent as late as last night. We need to talk. No accusations, no scenes, no shouting. That was what scared her the most. She found him in the living room. Larry was sitting in an armchair, looking perfectly calm. But that calmness was frightening. What's the meaning of this? She asked, waving the letter. I think you should tell me yourself, Nicole. He put the phone aside and looked at her as if he were seeing the real her for the first time. She felt her mouth go dry. There must be some mistake, she said quickly, trying to pull herself together. Maybe you were infected earlier? Or what? He tilted his head slightly, watching her closely. Or did it happen in some magical way? She opened her mouth, but no words came. Tell me, Nicole, who did you get that from? The tone of his voice was icy, without a drop of emotion. Nicole wanted to be outraged, to make a scene, to start crying, but something told her that wouldn't work. Larry. Her voice was soft, almost caressing. I need time to understand. You don't have it? He stood up, walked slowly over to her, and leaned forward. You either tell me everything now, or I'll just file for divorce with proof. Divorce, that word sounded like a punch in her face. She knew perfectly well that the prenup had been written in such a way as to leave her without everything. If he left, she would be left with nothing. Her voice trembled. I don't know. You know. He didn't look away. Neither did I. Nicole was a master manipulator all her life. She could convince anyone of anything. But now she was facing a man she had underestimated. She tried to stall for time. Larry, I'm pregnant. Let's not do this right now. He grinned. You really think that's going to stop me? Nicole frantically tried to think of a way to twist away. But then he uttered the words that finished her completely. I know the baby's not mine. She froze. What? Don't act surprised. He shoved his hands in his pockets and tilted his head slightly. We both know we've had very little intimacy these past few months. Come on, Nicole. Tell me who the father is. Nicole felt everything inside clench. She swallowed. I'm not sure. Of course, he nodded. So many candidates that it's hard to remember? My heart was pounding frantically. You just want to humiliate me, she whispered. No, Nicole. Larry looked at her with such contempt that she looked away. I want you to realize that it's over. She knew it was useless to plead with him. What are you going to do? She asked. Larry smiled, but that smile was intimidating. You'll find out soon enough. And he left the room, leaving her alone in a silence filled with her own fear. Nicole sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone in her hands, but she couldn't bring herself to text something or call someone. For the first time in a long time, she felt real panic. Not mild anxiety, not annoying worry, but paralyzing fear. Larry knew. Not just guessed or suspected, but knew. Her usual tricks didn't work. No tears, no innocent looks, no attempts to confuse him with words. It was as if he could see right through her, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for a long time. The only thing that mattered now was figuring out what he was going to do next. She quickly unlocked her phone and opened the banking app. The balance in their joint account was 0. There was a chill in my chest. She hastily checked her personal account. There were only a few $1,000s left. It was a disaster. All this time, she'd lived with the assurance that even if something went wrong, she'd always have a safety cushion in the form of his money. Yes, the prenup limited her in the event of a divorce, but if she acted first, she could get out of it. Now that option is gone. Larry stepped around her. She paced the bedroom, frantically trying to figure out what to do next. Her thoughts ranged from trying to apologize to fleeing to another state. But then she remembered the house. This mansion was their joint property, acquired during their marriage. Even with the contract, she had a right to it. If Larry decided to leave her without money, the house was her only bargaining chip. She quickly dialed the number of a realtor she had known before her marriage. "Greg, I need to discuss the sale of the house right away." There was a pause. "Nicole, you know it's already sold, right?" A chill went through her entire body, and the phone nearly fell out of her hand. "What did you say?" Her voice trembled. "I spoke to your husband a couple weeks ago. He brokered a trustee sale. It's already closed, and the house has been transferred to the new owners." She froze. "It's impossible." She whispered, "I'm sorry, but the deal is done." Greg sounded uncertain. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Nicole abruptly dropped the call and stared into the void. The house was sold. Without her knowledge. Without her consent. She had nothing else. A few seconds later, she rushed down the stairs, burst into the living room, but Larry was no longer there. She quickly went through the study, into the dressing room, peeked into the garage. Nothing. His car is gone. His things are gone. There was another envelope on the desk in the study. Nicole slowly walked over, picked it up with trembling fingers, and opened it. Inside was only a single sheet of paper. "Nicole, this is just the beginning." No more words. She felt her legs weaken and collapsed into the nearest chair. Larry's gone. No scandal. No explanation. No chance of fixing anything. She tried to calm her breathing and forced herself to think logically. Panic is a weakness. I can't afford to panic. She checked the bank accounts again, but the numbers hadn't changed. Okay, if I don't have money, then I need people. She opened her contact list and scrolled through it until she found the name she wanted. John Caldwell. Even though their relationship wasn't the most stable, he was still her most reliable option. He never hid the fact that he would do anything for her. She pressed call and brought the phone to her ear, praying he would answer. The beeps dragged on for an agonizingly long time, and finally his hoarse voice rang out. "What do you want?" Nicole tried to pull herself together. "I need your help." "Funny," he grinned. "Me too." She froze. "What's wrong? Why don't you tell me first why your husband made my license revoked?" Nicole turned pale. "What? You knew, didn't you?" His voice got harder. "I lost everything because of him, and now I can only wonder how far you betrayed him." Thoughts swirled in her head. Larry ruined his career. He knew not only of the treason, but of whom. "John, listen." "No, Nicole, you listen to me." He interrupted. "I don't know what you said to him, but don't call me again." The buzz cut off the conversation, leaving her in complete silence. Nicole stared at the phone, feeling fear turn to despair. John was the first, but probably not the last. She quickly found another Mark Whitman contact on her phone, one of her lovers. Pressed the call. The wait lasted only a couple seconds. "Hi." His voice was tired. "Mark, I need help," she blurted out, feeling her voice shake. He sighed. "Nicole, I'm in no position to help anyone right now." "What does that mean?" "That means someone ran my accounts, and the IRS is already digging into me." "One more." Nicole felt everything inside clench. Shit, she exhaled. Mark grinned. Say thank you to your husband. She dropped the call and frantically tried to think of what to do next. But there were no options left. Larry ruined all the lovers. They were her only backup plan. And now she was alone. She slowly made her way up to the second floor and walked to the window, looking out at the perfectly trimmed lawn. How was he able to pull all this off so quickly? Nicole woke up in the middle of the night, hardly realizing where she was or what time it was. The room was dark, the air seemed stale, and her mind was racing with chaotic thoughts. The last 24 hours had been a nightmare. Larry was gone, the money was gone, the house no longer belonged to her, and her lovers were as broken as she was. She'd hoped that when she woke up, she'd find that it had all been just a bad dream. But when she saw the nearly empty bedroom where she and Larry had once spent their evenings, she realized that the nightmare had become her new reality. She sat on the edge of the bed and covered her face with her hands. She had always had men in her life to solve her problems, provide comfort, and protect her from the consequences of her own actions. But now there was no one around to save her. John Caldwell lost his career. Mark Whitman had run afoul of the IRS. Other lovers had probably suffered losses, too. But Nicole hesitated to find out the details. Her once perfectly constructed world collapsed in an instant, and she had to find a way out on her own. She opened her laptop in the morning, hoping to find any clues that would help her figure out where Larry had disappeared to. She checked his email, but all the emails were either deleted or long and used. There was nothing new in his bank statements either. He'd cleaned everything out thoroughly. The last option left was his personal papers and documents, which he kept in a safe in his office. She went downstairs, walked to the office, and stopped in front of the massive safe that had always seemed impregnable to her. Larry had never told her the code, but she'd seen him open it more than once and hoped she'd memorized the sequence of numbers. Dialing the first combination, she pressed the confirmation button, but the safe emitted a sharp rejection beep. She tried the second option. The result was the same. Then she took a deep breath, concentrated, and entered the numbers that were associated with their wedding. The click of the lock made her flinch. The safe's open. Inside were documents, a few old photos, a flash drive, and a thin folder of papers. Nicole quickly grabbed the folder, sat down at her desk, and began examining the contents. It was clear from the very first pages that Larry had been preparing to disappear for a long time. He transferred all the assets into a trust that couldn't be challenged. He signed the house over to a third party and ran the deal through shell companies. He moved the money out without anyone being able to trace it. Every step was thought out to the last detail. Nicole frantically turned pages until she came across a printout of a train ticket. The date is 2 days ago. The route is New York to Pennsylvania. The terminus is Lancaster. She frowned. Lancaster. Why would he go there? Suddenly a memory flashed through her mind. A few months ago, Larry had been reading a book about Amish life, discussing their way of life with someone and saying there was something appealing about it. She'd laughed then, thinking he was just admiring their resilience. But now it didn't seem like a fluke. He could have disappeared anywhere. But if the ticket is real, that means he's there. She quickly grabbed her phone and opened her browser to find out more about Lancaster. It was a neighborhood known for its Amish communities, where people from the outside rarely looked in. If Larry really was headed there, it wouldn't be easy to find him. Nicole gripped the phone tighter, tried to think of what to do next. The first and most obvious step was to go there myself. She couldn't let him just disappear, leaving her with nothing. But we had to proceed with caution. She closed the safe, took the documents and flash drive, then went upstairs to quickly pack. Nicole didn't like driving long distances, but this time she had no choice. She left town at dawn, heading toward Lancaster, where she guessed Larry was hiding. The drive seemed endless, and the thoughts in her head were racing at breakneck speed. She tried to imagine how he could so cold-bloodedly leave her without everything that mattered to her. Did he really hate her so much that he'd planned her disappearance with such care? She knew that Larry had always been a man who played the long game. He never made hasty moves, never made rash decisions, and always kept everything under control. But even she couldn't imagine him being able to pull something like this off. Now she was left with only one question. Had he really been able to escape? Hours later, she finally made it to Lancaster. The city looked completely different from the places she was used to. Instead of skyscrapers and office buildings, there were wooden houses, small shops, and wide fields dotted with neat farms. She saw Amish people riding leisurely on horse-drawn wagons, and she realized she was in a completely different world. It remained to be seen if Larry had found his safe haven here. She parked the car on the curb, stepped outside, and breathed deeply of the fresh air. If he wanted to hide among people who avoided technology, didn't use banking systems, and didn't ask too many questions, this was the perfect place. But even the most gated communities have their weaknesses. She walked into a small diner on the main street and ordered a coffee, listening carefully to the conversations around her. Most people were talking about farming, supplies, and weather problems. No sign of Larry, but Nicole knew these things weren't solved in 5 minutes. She walked up to the counter, smiled at the older woman behind the cash register, and leaned a little closer. "I'm sorry, but perhaps you can help me." Her voice was soft, friendly, without a shadow of strain. "I'm looking for someone." The woman looked up at her, clearly not feeling any interest. "We're rarely looking for anyone here, ma'am. He's new to the area." Nicole changed her tone slightly, adding a touch of alarm to her voice. "Tall, dark hair, beard. Maybe he gave a different name." The woman hummed, as if hearing something amusing. "Half the men here have beards," she said with a chuckle. "You'll have to be more specific." Nicole squeezed out a restrained smile, but inside she felt annoyed. She opened her purse, pulled out her phone, and found an old picture of Larry from one of their trips. "Maybe you've seen him?" The woman glimpsed the screen and held her gaze for a second. Nicole noticed it right away. "I'm not sure." She mumbled, but her expression betrayed more than she meant to say. Nicole decided to press on. "I'm his wife." The woman blinked, but continued to remain cautiously silent. "We had a fight, and he left without telling me." Nicole lowered her eyes, as if she were in real pain. "I just want to know that he's okay." The woman sighed, shook her head, and moved a little closer, lowering her voice. "Last month, a newcomer showed up. Said he was looking for a simple life." Nicole held her breath. "Where is he now?" "If he is who I think he is, he lives on a farm a few miles from here." Nicole reached for her purse, but the woman immediately shook her head negatively. "We don't take money for such things," she said sternly. 20 minutes later, Nicole was already driving down a country road, surrounded by endless green fields, and found him really here. Larry never thought that one day he would wake up at dawn, go to sleep just after sunset, and spend all day doing physical labor. Life in the Amish community was different from anything he was accustomed to, but that was its greatest value. No one asked questions. No one inquired about his past. No one tried to find out why a man with his education and experience had chosen such a simple existence. He stood on the porch of a small wooden house that was now his new home and watched 2 young men harnessing a horse for the morning work in the fields. There were no market quotes, no business meetings, no stock trades, and certainly no people like Nicole. But he knew it was only a matter of time before she appeared. When he made the decision to disappear, he had no doubts or regrets, only cold calculation. He'd spent enough time analyzing her behavior, her reaction to crisis situations, and her ability to find a way out of even the most difficult circumstances. Nicole never gave up without a fight, especially when it came to her well-being. She could manipulate, lie, adjust, use any tool available to her, but most importantly, she didn't know how to lose. Larry knew she was coming. The only question was when exactly that would happen. While he was feeding the horses, Samuel, a young man from an Amish family, appeared nearby to help him adjust to his new life. He was one of the few people who didn't distrust outsiders, so Larry quickly found a rapport with him. "A woman was seen in town today looking for you," Samuel said, stepping closer and giving him a wary look. Larry didn't change his face, though he was inwardly ready for such news. Tall, well-groomed, wearing expensive clothes? Samuel nodded, crossing his arms over his chest. From the way she looked, it's obviously not your sister. Larry grinned as he continued to pour the feed. Definitely not. Did you know she was coming? No doubt about it. Samuel grumbled unhappily and ran his hand over his chin thoughtfully. Do you want to talk to her? No, but she won't accept it. Can she cause problems? Nicole is a walking problem. Samuel frowned, mulling over his words. Then you should decide what to do next. Larry already knew the answer to that question. When Nicole reached the farm, the sun was high in the sky, and the air was filled with the sounds of people and animals working. She stopped the car some distance away, got out, and looked around. There were fields, wooden houses, and barns all around, and in the middle of it all stood the man she was looking for. Larry. He was dressed in a simple linen shirt with sleeves rolled up, dark pants and sturdy boots, and his face was now covered with a thick beard she'd never seen before. He looked different, but she still recognized him at once. Her feet carried her forward on their own. Larry. He showed no surprise, no concern, not even irritation. He just looked at her as if her appearance meant nothing. Nicole, are you kidding me? Her voice trembled with tension. Is this your great revenge? To disappear into some backwater and leave me with nothing? Exactly, he replied calmly, without a hint of emotion. She froze, feeling a wave of rage rising inside her. You ruined my life. I just took you out of mine. Nicole gritted her teeth, realizing he wasn't going to give her what she was expecting. You can't just run away, Larry. That's not the man you were. Do you really think you know what kind of man I was? Nicole realized she wasn't acting right. She needed convincing, not anger. She took a step closer, softened her voice, and looked him in the eye. Larry, you have to come back. Should I? We can fix this. He grinned, shaking his head slightly. Do you really think so? Yes. She leaned closer. I made a mistake, but we can start over. How interesting. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. When I found out you cheated on me, you didn't apologize. When I got an STD, you didn't try to fix it. When I disappeared, you didn't even think about just leaving me alone. Nicole felt her confidence begin to crumble. Larry, I'm pregnant. I'm not the one who got you pregnant. She clenched her fists. Are you really willing to give up everything? I don't have anything else to give up. She felt despair slowly gripping her. You're going to regret this. Larry looked at her intently, and then said just 3 words that finally set the stage. Not anymore, Nicole. She didn't know what to do next. Nicole never walked away a loser, especially when her own future was at stake. She knew Larry had changed, cold-blooded and calculating, but that didn't mean he was invulnerable. Everyone had weaknesses, even if they thought they'd gotten rid of them. She watched him, carefully analyzing his facial expressions, the movements of his hands, the slightest changes in his intonation. He was confident, calm, almost indifferent, but there were probably still emotions inside him. You couldn't just turn them off like a light switch. If he won't budge, then you need to create a situation where he has no choice. She took a step closer, deliberately touching his arm as she had once done in moments when she wanted to accomplish something. Larry, I know you hate me right now. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. But if you think you can just erase me from your life, you're wrong. He looked at her with a slight chuckle, but didn't pull away. Nicole, I don't think I already did. She inhaled deeply, letting her eyes moisten a little, but not so much that it looked like hysteria. Men hated tears, but weak, controlled sadness could make them sympathetic. Do you really want it to end like this? She tilted her head slightly, softening her expression. Without a chance to talk, without a chance to work things out. There's nothing to figure out, he said calmly, but Nicole could detect a slight shadow of doubt in his voice. It was a sign, a small, but still a crack in his armor. She lowered her eyes, pretending to struggle with her emotions. You're the only man I've ever really loved, Larry. He didn't answer right away, which meant something was going on inside him. Nicole knew how to speak, knew how to set accents, knew which words tugged at the heartstrings. Yes, I've made mistakes, but I've always seen you as my man. We could have made things right if you'd given me a chance. He hummed, but instead of irritation, there was something else in his voice. A chance. A fix. Interesting choice of words, Nicole. She smiled slightly, hoping he would take it as a sign of sincerity. Everyone is entitled to a second try. She felt him begin to hesitate. Larry was smart, but deep down he was still the man who had once loved her. If she plays the situation right, he'll either come back or make a fatal mistake that she can use against him. But he suddenly stepped backward, breaking free of her illusion of control. If you really loved me, Nicole, you wouldn't be trying to turn me into one of your other fools. She inwardly tensed, but outwardly remained calm. That's not true, Larry. That's exactly right. She gritted her teeth. What are you going to do? He didn't answer right away, and that made her anxious. You know what, Nicole? Let's play your game. His voice was steady, but his eyes said he already had a plan. Larry stared at Nicole, studying every detail of her behavior, every nonverbal cue, every shade of emotion sliding across her face. She was sure she was still in control, that she could use her subterfuge to break him, but she didn't understand the most important thing: he'd been playing by his own rules for a long time. She was a master of manipulation, but this time the manipulation was working against her. He pretended to think about it, letting her believe that her words had really hurt him. Maybe you're right, Nicole. He softened his voice deliberately, adding a note of doubt. Maybe I was too quick to write you off. Her eyes squinted slightly, as if she was trying to gauge how sincere he was. Do you really think so? Maybe I should believe you. She took a tiny step forward, catching the moment when his defenses supposedly weakened. I don't want us to become enemies, Larry. Her voice sounded almost pleading. We can start with a clean slate. He nodded faintly, maintaining the expression of a man who was beginning to hesitate. Maybe. He paused, letting her hope grow stronger. But I need something from you. Nicole nodded faster than she had time to consider his words. Anything. He looked carefully into her eyes and said, Prove that you trust me. She froze, losing control of her emotions for a moment. What do you mean? If you really want to make things right, you have nothing to hide. Nicole exhaled nervously, but quickly pulled herself together. Of course, I have nothing to hide. Her voice was firm, but Larry noticed her fingers unconsciously tighten. Then let's talk about your bank accounts, he said casually, as if in between. I want to make sure you're not playing me. She tensed instantly, her body giving away more than she could hide with words. It's pointless, Larry. Is it? He tilted his head, looking at her the way he'd once looked at clients he'd trapped in negotiations. Or maybe you're afraid there's something in there I shouldn't see. She grinned nervously, but her face was already betraying fear. That's ridiculous. Then prove it. He pulled out his phone, turned on the screen recording, and placed it on the table. Log into your online banking, Nicole. She froze. You can't demand it. I'm not demanding anything. I'm just giving you a chance to show me that you're not lying to me. She swallowed, realizing she was trapped, but she had no way out. Her fingers moved quickly at first, but then she froze at the authorization screen. I can't remember the password. Larry grinned. Oh, really? She set the phone down on the table, gritting her teeth. You don't trust me. Trust is a two-way street, Nicole. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her bag and headed for the exit. It was all a mistake. You finally said something true. She stopped with one last angry glance at him and walked out, slamming the door. Larry exhaled slowly, but felt no joy or satisfaction. He simply closed a chapter that had poisoned his life for too long. Nicole's not coming back. She tried to manipulate him, but this time she lost. He picked up his phone, opened the pre-prepared email, and pressed send. The addressee was the detective to whom he had given all the evidence of her financial machinations. Nicole thought she was the one setting the traps, but now she was in it for herself. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you like the story, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm show my content more often. If you are new to the channel, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep making more stories for you.